Hello, everyone. This is Adam Meister, the Bitcoin Meister, the Disrupt Meister. Welcome to Today in Bitcoin. Today is January the 9th, 2017, and we finally have a remote guest. It is the legend, Andy Hoffman of Miles Franklin Precious Metals. I know everyone is so enthused. It's a great honor for him to be the first remote guest ever on this show. Before we talk to him, though, I wanted to say thank you to the person who sent me the Bitcoin. That was very nice of you. So now it's time to talk to Andy Hoffman, who you've heard all over the web before. He talks about precious metals wherever he can, and you all love him, and he's very entertaining, very energetic. He's similar to me in many ways, but he talks about Bitcoin sometimes too. And now we're going to really get some of his Bitcoin opinions and ideas, and we'll talk about precious metals. We'll talk about everything. So Andy Hoffman, welcome to the show. Give us your Bitcoin story, some of your thoughts about Bitcoin, how you got into it, how you changed your mind, because you were very open-minded about it.
Right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And, like your subscriber base, which just passed 2,000, my interest in Bitcoin has increased at an exponential rate, and I expect it to continue doing so. And essentially what it comes down to is, for those that don't know me, I'm from New York. I worked on Wall Street for close to 20 years, and if you include pretty much what I'm doing now, it's close to 30 years. But around 2002, I became very disillusioned with what I did on Wall Street. At the time, I was a sell-side analyst covering the oilfield service sector at Salomon Smith Barney, and I moved all of my portfolio into precious metals. And about that time, I started to get into learning about the sector and why I think it's going to go up over time. And by the time I left Wall Street in 2005, I was a full-fledged 100% invested precious metal person. And I then wound up working in the mining industry for close to 5 years, and now I've been at Miles Franklin, one of the largest bullion dealers in America, for I just passed my 5 years. And all along, I've been writing missives, always for free, and podcasts talking about why I believe the fiat monetary system will continue to weaken, and why alternative money is required. And over that entire time, I thought was the only thing that could ever replace it. Fiat money was the one thing that has always worked, which was precious metals via gold standards. But what I've learned in my now 15 years in the precious metal sector is that governments can't be trusted to do anything. And in fact, they have reneged or destroyed every gold standard they've ever administered, just as they've reneged or destroyed every fiat currency standard. And right now, we're at the end of arguably the largest, most destructive fiat currency standard ever, which is why so many currencies are falling apart. And I still own as much precious metals as I ever have. However, I've been increasingly skeptical of what the future of money will be, because I don't believe anyone will ever trust a government again to issue any kind of money, and certainly not after realizing that the governments lie about how much gold they have to administer a gold standard. And so when Bitcoin came around, came around in my mind around 2013, I became aware of it as the whole Mt. Gox thing built up. I even lost about $1,000 in it on a speculative basis. I watched it, and in time, it seemed to have its track record of a storage of value and all of the myths about its hackability and of how much could ever be produced were slowly dissolved in my mind. And I just kind of realized, I started writing about it vehemently about a year ago, and that's when I really started acquiring it as well, that the future of money is going to be something that's going to be decentralized. And as far as I see, Bitcoin is the only thing on that horizon right now. Now, from a storage of value perspective, gold and silver are going to be more powerful than they've ever been, especially because they've been suppressed for so long and supply is so low compared to demand. I think if anything, I just wrote 2 weeks ago why Bitcoin will make gold and silver up, because I truly believe the governments are going to realize that from a monetary standpoint, Bitcoin is their biggest threat, because it's a far more usable currency than gold has ever been or ever will be.
Wow. I think that's great. Those articles that you posted actually were quite informative, and I did link to them, and I think people should read them and kind of go into more how I guess you see a lot of people out there who are into precious metals almost feel like Bitcoin is a competitor. Yet I see it more as they're complementary to each other. What do you think about that?
Well, absolutely. And, you've mentioned in recent days, and I sent you a little message yesterday that says the anti-Bitcoin propaganda, or let's call it, it's not even propaganda as much as it is a lack of knowledge and ignorance from the precious metals space, is as virulent and nasty as the anti-gold propaganda that comes from the mainstream media and Wall Street. I mean, you cited some of the examples. I'm not going to name names, but we're talking about some of the biggest names in our sector saying things about Bitcoin that are literally complete nonsense. And you know it, and anyone listening knows it. And I think most of the people listening to them obviously don't know because they don't know a thing about it. And the fact is, when it first came out, look, I had my little $1,000 loss in Mt. Gox. And at the time, Bitcoin was surging, and okay, no, I had an issue with my computer. Sorry. At the time, Bitcoin was surging, and gold was getting hit very hard by what I call the gold cartel. So I had a lot of animosity toward it, and I thought, well, this competitor, this new upstart, is coming to steal all of our business and become the new money that gold has been for 5,000 years. And I think a lot of people in my sector felt that kind of anger. It was based not on knowledge, but more on superstition and fear. Now here we are 3 years later, and gold has still been in the throes of some very, very, very virulent price suppression. So the rise of Bitcoin has again got attention in our sector in a negative way, mostly because again they're scared of it and they're angry that it's taking its thunder. But the way that I've looked at it is I've now analyzed it, and believe me, when I analyzed between all the years I spent figuring out everything I could about the oil sector, which I worked in 10 years, and now 15 years in the precious metals, when I get into something, I get into it big. And that's why I spend as much time now trying to learn about cryptocurrencies, such as on your channel, the World Crypto Network, and Andreas Antonopoulos, and pretty much anyone else who has something to say. I saw that great Banking on Bitcoin documentary yesterday, which we can talk about if you like. But my point is, I think all of what's going on in our sector now is, again, it's based on ignorance. And yet here we are 3 years later, and Bitcoin has had an exponential increase in the global understanding of how it works, in its uptake, and of course its use cases, especially now that all these paper monies are literally, in some cases, overtly being destroyed, like in China, in India, in much of the third world. And heck, look at Japan and the ECB and the Bank of England and the Bank of Switzerland. So again, I think our sector here in the precious metals needs to realize what I've been saying for the past year, which is that they are allies. I wrote an article in May called "Precious Metals and Bitcoin," what I call them, the twin destroyers of the fiat regime, because I think that they are going to hand in hand take funds away from the fiat assets that the government so desperately wants to prop up.
Wow, that was, I remember that one. That was a great title. It was a great article, and people should definitely check that out. I'll link to his blog below here, so everyone who isn't familiar with Andy can read some of his awesome stuff that's out there. So I'm glad you alluded to some of the more guys who are out there that, yeah. I'm glad because I was going to ask you about a specific person, but there's no need to do that. But speaking of FUD, and specifically, I guess, Bitcoin FUD, to see what you feel on the total Bitcoin side of things, getting away from precious metals for a second, what is up with Roger Ver? What do you think is up with Roger Ver and his what he thinks about segregated witness and the stand he's taking?
Well, that's a Bitcoin question. You're asking a precious metal person, but
yeah, we want to hear. I think people are very interested in that. I think people are interested in that perspective. Yeah.
Well, fortunately, I've done enough research to know exactly who Roger Ver is and what you're talking about. And I don't know all the way back, although I've learned a bit about. He got in early, so he's obviously a very rich man. He may have gotten early for different reasons than the reasons he's in now. But I think it's honestly, I think he's got an ego. Some people say that, well, he's being compromised. He's got all the big money behind him and government's at his ear. And if you ask me, I think he's got an ego, and he thinks that he knows more than anyone else. And so he's done what, you know, absolute power is corrupted. He has all this money and people calling him Bitcoin Jesus and throwing projects and money at him. And he decided in his mind that he wants a hard fork. And, you know, when I listen to, you know, we talk about some of these people out there that say absolutely stupid things. When Roger Ver says, well, the reason it's failing is because it's pure economics. I mean, the higher the price of the fees, the less people are going to use it. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Sometimes fees go up because demand goes up. And the reason, look, the fees may go down for other reasons. There may be competition in time, and maybe they'll find a technological solution outside of a hard fork that'll make fees go down. But let's face it, there is no way in ever that the consensus will ever allow a hard fork in Bitcoin. So, I mean, the way I put it with him is he's going to become a rich man if he just sits there and shuts up. And he's also going to become a rich man if he blabs his mouth out. So you might as well just sit down and relax, because all his ideas, like all the other ones before it, that are trying to change something that is immutable to unimmutable, are not going to happen.
Well, that's a great answer, by the way. I really like it. Speaking of hard forks and the lessons we've learned from hard forks, what are your views about Ethereum and other altcoins, or do you have any opinions about them?
Well, my opinions are limited to the fact that I watch and I know about all of the major ones. I know the top list. I know your views on them, and I have a general view of what they all are to do. And as far as I'm concerned, it's almost the difference between in the precious metal sector, owning gold and silver. And I know you have your rule. If you want to own Bitcoin, just own Bitcoin, not Bitcoin miners. Well, I have dealt with the same thing for years in my sector. And years ago, I was an advocate of, for instance, gold mining companies, and I worked for them for many years. But now it's at the point where I think, you know, if you think something's going to go up, just own the gold and silver and don't worry about the other ones. These altcoins are, in my mind, the equivalent of mining shares. Maybe Ethereum is better than the others. Maybe Monero is better than the others, but maybe not. I mean, there's absolutely no certainty that any of them will be big winners. Some of them may well be big winners, but as far as I'm concerned, I now am as conservative as possible. I own no, as I call them, paper PM investments. I own only physical gold and silver and a little platinum. And as far as Bitcoin, I have no intention of owning anything else but actual Bitcoin.
Speaking about being conservative with your Bitcoin, where do you store your Bitcoin? I know where you store your Bitcoin, but I mean, what is your procedure like? I know you were not comfortable with leaving it on the exchange, which is great advice, but you really got into, you're into storage of you're very careful with storage of your valuables, basically. So tell us a little bit about what you think about storage in Bitcoin, I guess.
Right. Well, you know, when it comes to storage, it goes back to my precious metals roots. I mean, we at Miles Franklin, we advocate more than anyone that you should be very careful how you store your precious metals. I mean, you can lose them in so many ways. If you're in paper assets like GLD or mining shares, you could lose them because a third party takes them. If you own, but if you hold them in a third party storage unit, you better be careful who you own it with, et cetera. And that's why we have very special programs, for instance, with Brinks Canada and Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And that's where I hold most of mine. And generally speaking, with precious metals, I always advocate that if you can, the best place to hold it is at home, where no one else can get to it except for need-to-know people, and guard it well. Because believe me, there's always someone who wants to take what you have if it's held somewhere else. And Mt. Gox was the perfect example, and Bitfinex for that matter. So as far as Bitcoin, you know, when I initially owned it, I owned it at Coinbase. I held it at Coinbase like it was a stock account. And then when the Bitfinex hack, I mean, look, I had realized about Mt. Gox, but people said, oh, don't worry, Coinbase is great, it's great. But then when I saw the Bitfinex hack, and that too was a very big exchange, I said, no more. I'm not going to risk being on Coinbase when they get hacked at some point, which they may or may not do. And that's why I sought how to find things offline. You helped me educate. I mean, there's the Trezor and all kinds of other things. Adam at Trezor help. And I advocate, like precious metals, the most important thing about Bitcoin is to hold it off the grid so no one else can get to it except for you and need-to-know people.
Yeah, this is great advice for the young people out there, because as you've probably noticed, there are a lot of young, energetic guys that are getting into this space, and they say all sorts of things. They want to they have Bitcoin, but they just don't want it to sit there. They want to do something with it. And as I said, it's better just to hold it than to do something, because you're going to get involved in these scams and stuff. So, I mean, do you have any advice to these people who want to flip their Bitcoin, who think they're traders, who want to flip back and forth between alts? I mean, I think I've said it again and again and again, it's a loser's game. Trying to complicate things is just, you're going to get yourself into trouble. You've been around trading stuff and investing stuff for many years, and all different types of commodities. Can you tell these young guys that, you know what, trading on some of these platforms is risky unto itself, but investing your Bitcoin into these projects, I mean, what do you think about do the guys just have too much testosterone out there? Or is there too many risk-taking young people out there? Because it seems like Bitcoin, it's so many people get hurt by Bitcoin, and I don't think it has to happen that way. There's so many scams out there.
Well, it's not just testosterone. There's plenty of older people out there too, and there's plenty of women traders, I'm sure, in China these days doing the same thing. But look, when it comes down to it, again, I've written thousands of articles now, and I wish I could remember the name of the one I wrote about this topic. Look, the best way to save your investment over time is to hold it. And that's why, if you hold Bitcoin or gold in a paper, or mining shares in a paper form, you are going to be tempted to click and sell it. I guarantee you, no matter what you do, and you are going to click and sell it when any kind of negative thing comes around. And that's why what I've done after years, as you say, of being forced to sell and then buy back and sell and buy back. First it was the internet stocks way back when, and then it was mining stocks, which is a double whammy because they're constantly under attack by the cartel. So there's so many more times where I had fear. I realized to myself, one, I no longer want to own the paper PM investments. I just want to own the real thing, which is far less volatile. And as we know, Bitcoin is far more volatile than even gold and silver are. And that's not even, and that's the actual Bitcoin. That's the number one thing. And the number two thing is, if you can hold it offline in a place that's difficult to sell, like now that I own physical gold and silver and it's stored somewhere, let's say the price is going down and there's a big rumor that something terrible is going to happen. It's very hard for me to sell it. I'd have to actually go get it from where it is and then have it packaged and all kinds of things. And the same with Bitcoin. It's stored offline. I can't just go on my computer, oh, I'm going to hit sell on my click on my mouse. And so that's my biggest advice, people. I mean, whether you're on physical gold, silver, or Bitcoin, is, stick to your guns, hold your position, and do not trade it, because you will lose 90% of the time.
I think that is great advice. Just make it hard for yourself to sell it. Put some obstacles in the way for.
That's absolutely what I'm saying.
Prevent you from selling it. Yeah, think of that's great. That is great advice. Now we're going to go back to some, a Bitcoin person that you've recently, disagreed with is Vinny Lingham, who, I like Vinny Lingham. I like what he has to say and everything. But and people saw that you alluded to him in an article of yours. What is it that you disagree with Vinny Lingham on in terms of, I believe it was something that he said about precious metals, was it? Or was it I forgot what it was.
It's a bunch of things. Now, look, I don't know him. He's obviously a smart man and an entrepreneur and a Bitcoin visionary. It has nothing to do with his knowledge of Bitcoin. In fact, I can't say that anything I've read of him about Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies I've had any issue with. But like I said, it's kind of the reverse. I'm talking about the anti-Bitcoin propaganda that goes on in the in our space, in the precious metal space, is really bad. Well, his anti-precious metal propaganda, it's even worse, because it's on an equal plane of cluelessness. The things that he's written. First of all, he talks so confidently about, the Fed rate hikes and how important they are. And I'm going, does this guy really understand, monetary policy and how money works, for someone who's such a brilliant Bitcoin expert? And the things he said about precious metals, how they're overvalued based on nothing. It's kind of like precious metal people saying Bitcoin's overvalued. Oh yeah, well, why? And he says, probably, and I hope he hears this, probably the most idiotic thing I've ever heard talked about against precious metals. He said, they're overvalued because when the European Union crashes, France, Italy, and Germany, and all these countries have all this gold that they're going to have to sell to pay their debts. I mean, I'm not even sure I need to back that up here with evidence, because it's such a silly thing to say. Aside from the fact that if the European Union truly crashes, there's going to be 500 million Europeans desperately trying to get out of their fiat currencies and into gold and silver. And the fact that probably Germany doesn't even have half the gold it says. And I assure you, it's going to be the last thing that Germany and France and Italy would sell. My point is, look, Vinny Lingham is a brilliant guy, but you have to consider the source. And so I'm one of the few people who's actually not in the Bitcoin world, who's in a theoretical competitive world, not saying something bad. So I think my opinion should be taken a little more objectively. Whereas when people like him are talking down to precious metals, or people on our side are talking down about Bitcoin, about reasons which are, you know, fallacious, just be careful. Look, I have a lot of respect for the guy, but the things he says about precious metals are absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. So I mean, even the best can send out some misinformation sometimes, definitely. And there is a lot of false information out there about a lot of things. And it seems like the internet community, a lot of the people who come to my channel, probably a lot of people who come to your blog and that you interact with, they want to believe some of the most craziest things, some of the things with the easiest explanations, where they don't have to think a lot, where some machine tells them, you know, makes predictions and stuff. So for a few months now, people on my channel I had never even heard of this thing before. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. They told me about this thing called WebBot. And I think it is one of the silliest things. Believe in like a mythical creature that tells them what's going to happen, a mythical psychic. And I don't understand. I mean, I guess there's this some people, there's a human nature. People want something from above to tell them what to do. But what do you think about this WebBot phenomenon? Because it is a phenomenon, and it frustrates me, because I see all these smart people giving really good reasons why Bitcoin might work, why it might not work, why you should invest in precious metals, why you should invest in Bitcoin. But then you have this thing that says cryptic statements that make no sense, that get interpreted by some guy, and he's wrong most of the time. I mean, what do you think about that, WebBot?
Right, and we won't name any names about who runs WebBot or the other things, but you're exactly right. It's what I've learned for years and years in this business. People want to be told something that guarantees them to be right. They don't care if the person who tells them never tells them exactly what it is. They just know if this person says he knows something that no one else says. For instance, we have all these newsletter writers in our sector that say you should buy precious metals or sell them or trade them because my proprietary technical analysis says it's going to happen, and they often will cite reasons why it works. The thing is that if you read what they've said in the past, they always hedge what they say. They'll say, if it goes up, well then this, but if it goes down, then this. So when it does one or the other, they'll say, see, I said either or, right? So you have proprietary technical analysis. People are desperate to believe that it's infallible, and therefore they can't lose. So those are the kind of newsletter writers that get the best subscriberships. Not people like me who simply tell the truth and don't say stuff like, I know what's going to happen, trust me. And as for WebBot, and believe me, there's plenty of others out there. You talking about the Shemitah. There were people that played on the Shemitah, saying it's guaranteed to make precious metals go. There's another guy out there who talks about biblical prophecy that guarantees that precious metals are going to go up. There's a whole bunch of those things, and WebBot. But what it comes down to is these people are playing on your fears. They know very well, like us, that, for instance, the Bitcoin and precious metal fundamentals are ridiculously positive. So they say stuff like, we know it's going to go up based on these mythical, magical things that we're in connection with, or that were cast in stone years ago, because they figure they're going to eventually be right. And when they are right once or twice, the broken clock, then the people who are fervent believers are like, see, he was right. But most of the things that they say, including WebBot, if you look at them, are extremely generic. And anytime that they do make a very specific prediction, they are always, always wrong, such as when WebBot this summer predicted the 30 days of July, in which silver would go to $38 an ounce, and I think Bitcoin was going to go to like 1,500. neither happened, but the people still believe that the next time around it will be right.
Wow. Yes, I agree. Very good reasoning there. So how was that Banking on Bitcoin movie? How was it?
It was great. I mean, look, it's a primer. All I'm trying to do is educate myself. I mean, this is how you learn about people like Roger Ver and what they are about, good and bad, and the history of when it came around, and where it is today. And then look, it's no coincidence that Bitcoin took off literally months after the financial crisis. There's people around the world who are terrified of what's going to happen to the purchasing power of their currencies. And what we've seen in the last few months, not uncoincident with the surge in Bitcoin, is actual governments destroying their own currencies. We've witnessed. You mentioned one thing I take at issue with you sometime when you sometimes say about how everything's going to be fine. It's there's a fear mongering, but the fact is, for the vast, I shouldn't say the vast amount, a very large percentage of the earth, the people have seen their currencies destroyed in the last 2 years. And I'm talking about destroyed. And in the case of a place like India, we're talking about the currencies taken away from them. So I think that there's a lot of fear out there in the world. And I think that, when you watch documentaries like that and you watch your podcast and the other smart people in the sector, you get a feeling of the whole big picture of why people are doing things and what's driving people to Bitcoin, and frankly to precious metals as well. The only difference is Bitcoin is much harder to suppress, and I don't know if they'll ever be able to truly suppress it because it doesn't have that the ability to really naked short it in mass, which gold and silver do. So I think people should need to get educated as much as they can on all matters monetary.
Yeah, I think it's a good point about Bitcoin not being able to be suppressed, possibly. We'll see. Now, there's a lot of talk about Bitcoin.
Jawboning. They can do jawboning and capital controls, that kind of suppression. But as for the suppression like they do in precious metals, where they have this fractional reserve system where they figured out this big, giant, futures scam, which for years has been able to hold the price down, that's not going to be possible for Bitcoin. So while there's a little naked shorting on some of the exchanges, there is no way they'll be able to hold the tide back of trading. It's going to have to be jawboning like the Chinese government was doing last week, trying to scare people out. And that's only going to work for so long.
Well, this is actually a great segue into my next question. I was going to ask you to talk about China a little bit, because you and I have actually emailed about not necessarily the Chinese government, but some of the tendencies of the Chinese people and how we as Americans maybe can learn from them. They're under a different economic situation than we are, definitely. But it seems like the Chinese who can gather up enough money and value, they immediately try to get into precious metals. They try to get into Bitcoin. They try to get their money out of there. Yet we here in the US, we're presented with this like vilification of the Chinese as a whole. Like, we should not try to learn from them. We should not try to emulate them in any way. And again, their government is authoritarian and problematic. And I'm not talking about the government, but I think if you look at what the Chinese people are trying to do, the ones who, when they can immediately afford, when they have enough money, they try to change their money, their yuan, into something else, whether it be Bitcoin, whether it be Vancouver real estate, whatever it can be. I think we can learn a lot. They just don't sit there and wait for bad things to happen, because they've already seen pretty bad things happen. They're proactive people. And I think we should look at trends in China. And again, when it comes to Bitcoin, there's a lot of mystery involved over there, because their exchanges, I don't think, are honest. They're not telling, the volumes are higher. But again, the Chinese people and their tendencies, I think as Americans, we can learn from. And if we see that, these guys are really, it is pretty obvious they're interested in Bitcoin, that we can learn something from that. So, I mean, give me your thoughts on China, I guess.
Right. Well, look, first of all, China had the first fiat currency and the first fiat currency to be destroyed, which was 1,000 years ago. So there's no nation that has more history with the destruction of fiat currency than them. And believe me, it's ingrained in their DNA. They also have no safety net. As while the nation is theoretically communist, there's no way the government can ever feed 1.5 billion people, which is why they've created so much overcapacity and desperately trying to buy a few more years before inevitably there's going to be a revolution. So they have no safety net. So they are very, very proactive in protecting themselves, as opposed to Western nations, including the United States, which are becoming increasingly socialist, and the people believe that their currencies, which because they're the leading Western currencies, are stronger to start with, will be able to support them forever. Additionally, they have a history. Look, the PBOC and the Chinese government, I mean, they're communists. They can call themselves capitalists all they want, but they're hopelessly communist. They're as much Keystone cops in charge. I mean, they've made some wise decisions, as in figuring out how to steal a lot of the manufacturing of the world, but they still have really no idea what to do. They're central planners that have created the biggest bubbles in history, bigger than even we have over here in Europe, if you could believe that. So I think the people over there know that. They also know about the capital controls in the yuan. They know that the government is devaluing the yuan and clearly intends to do it far more. So now they're even more scared of the capital controls and the devaluation. So, as a people, they just have a different culture, and the culture is more protecting themselves than anyone in our time here has ever had to do. And they're also at the most dire times, because there's no doubt. I mean, look, I wrote back in August of last year, in 2015, I said the upcoming cataclysmic financial big bang to end all big bangs is coming, which is going to be a major yuan devaluation. And they actually started it 24 hours later. And here we are 16 months or 18 months later, and we're now, we're down 15%. We're on the verge of breaking below 7.0 to the dollar, which I assure you, I mean, that's why they went to such lengths last week to push the yuan back up, which, by the way, is falling again, and to try to get Bitcoin down, because they know that once it's under 7, I mean, once it's over 7 per dollar, that there's going to be a lot of speculation of how far it's going to go, and they won't be able to control the capital flows. And right now they're already having huge capital flows that are putting them on the brink financially. So, the people, this is not lost on the people of China, and they are, and it's kind of like, yeah, they put a little speed bump in front of them the other day, and aside from the shame on you traders who are buying on leverage at the top, most people are like us, who just sit there and hold it. And as soon as they see now that, look, the floor is around 900, not around 400 or something, they're going to come in en masse again. And it's the same thing with gold and silver. I mean, you're trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can only do it for so long before inevitably supply and demand, or as I call it, economic Mother Nature, wins out.
Well, this has been a great talk, a great interview. Now I have one more question real quick, because time has flown. It's awesome. Who else in the Bitcoin space, you mentioned some names out there, but who else do you like out there? I know some different people, and you've mentioned some names to me offline before. Name some names of some people, maybe who I should have on the show and stuff. Who do you like out there?
Yeah, well, the beauty of the sector is that for as far as it's come, meaning the price, I mean, usually when price goes up, the whole world jumps on it. But as far as it's come in terms of time and price, I see so little actual coverage of the sector. The fact that you only have 2,000 subscribers, or I'll look at the World Crypto Network, they'll do their weekly things, and these are, the biggest names, and you'll look and they'll have a couple thousand views, and I'm going, that is just crazy, because this is the top of the line. But that just shows you how far this space has to grow, that so few people are watching. But as far as what I watch, I certainly watch yours every day. It gives me, you remind me of myself a lot. You just say it like it is, and you're grounded with real values that I think will help people. I certainly listen to the World Crypto Network, guys like Tone and Gabriel Devine and Vortex and Thomas Hunt. I think they're great. Andreas Antonopoulos, as far as I'm concerned, is the most brilliant mind, one of the most brilliant financial minds in the entire world. I don't miss a thing that he says or does. And otherwise I scour the net. As far as other people in my sector that are very big on Bitcoin, one is Bix Weir, who is Road to Ruta. He has a lot of theories that may be speculative in nature, but as far as he's been a long time supporter of precious metals, and he's an equally vehement Bitcoin supporter now. And of course, he's at roadtoruta.com, and my good friend Michael Krieger at libertyblitzkrieg.com, who was probably the first person who told me about Bitcoin probably 3 or 4 years ago. And he writes a blog every day talking about, human rights and how our government is stealing from and lying. And I think those people are some of the people that you really want to be interested in talking to.
All right, those are awesome names there, Michael Krieger and Bix Weir. I don't know if everyone's heard of them, so you've definitely added it to the knowledge base here. Well, Andy Hoffman, thank you so much for being the first remote guest on the show. I think people are going to love this, and I have had a great time. I hope we can do this again, over and over again, get you on some panels, maybe have some debates, just go totally outside the box with this in the future. I've got all sorts of ideas, and this was just a great first step. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Look forward to doing it again.
All right, everyone. Well, that's all for today. I'm Adam Meister, the Bitcoin Meister, the Disrupt Meister. Remember to subscribe to this channel, like this video, share this video, spread the word. This is Today in Bitcoin. It is very exciting. I will talk to you later. Thanks again, Andy Hoffman.